How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this episode talking about exactly how to get into the hobby of comic book collecting. This is sort of guide slash tips and tricks, things that I find are important when you're starting out. I like to be well informed. I like to know exactly what I'm getting into, make sure I'm not overpaying for something, know exactly what to value and what not to value when it comes to collecting comic books. Now, when I originally thought of comic books, I usually thought of something like this we have here. We have Spider-Woman #1. This is a classic, case of a comic book. You have a, nice cover, nice colors, all that kind of stuff. Very cheap, 35 cent. Yeah, you can see there. And this is what I thought when it came to comic books, um, exactly what they are and what they'd be. So this is obviously an older issue. Came out maybe early 80s into the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. Um, it's very nice, and like an 8.5 on the rating scale. Anyway, so I thought of this, another example of a similar comic book here. You have Amazing Spider-Man with a Juggernaut in the background. This is what I thought originally when it came to comic books and what they would look like. Um, but uh, and value-wise, these are older. They're a little bit more expensive. But there's some important history to learn about comic books, and that started off in the late 80s and early 90s, where comic books had really picked up a lot of support, and a lot of people were joining in on the hobby due to the fact that these older comics were fetching for high prices. And so people saw this opportunity to jump into a hobby that could also act as an investment opportunity. So you had tons of people buying up tons of issues, comic books. The thing was very popular um, in the late 80s and early 90s. And there was a problem there. With all these people buying up multiples of the same copy of comic books, they forgot to realize that um, comic books, the reason why they were originally so expensive at that time was because they weren't just old, but they were also scarce. And that's a huge driving factor when it comes to older comic books and what they're worth. Uh, the reason why they were so scarce is because they weren't taken care of. Um, Most people back then didn't think of them as a investment opportunity. So they didn't take care of them. They didn't put them in sleeves or bags or anything like that. They were pretty torn up just because they were read rather than being just collected. And that was a big shift in the community with exactly how people thought of comic books. And so, for example, comic books that came out during the late 80s, early 90s, and stuff like that. Uh, I have two. Here's two X-Men 289. I have two more in a box. Um, and this is what people did. They would buy them. They probably wouldn't even read them. They would just put them in a bag and board like this, and they'd put them in a box, hoping that they would just by keeping them for 20 or so years, they expected that they would go up in value inherently, and that's just not the case. You can find these now for about 50 cent or a dollar at your local comic store. At your local comic store, most likely. So, uh, this huge bubble eventually burst in the mid 90s. So, comic books like these, people realized that these would never be worth anything. They don't hold any sort of significance, really. There's nothing really going on. The ones that did hold value had important characters that were introduced, or a very popular one in the 90s was the death of Superman, which was a big deal at the time. That still holds some value. I think it's with the first appearance of the Doomsday. I think I have one. It's issue Man of Steel issue number 18. That goes for 15, $20 still, even though that was bought up during that time. And so it's important to know that. So when you're getting into stuff like this in the 90s and 80s, you really have to be aware of what you're buying. Now, not everything, obviously, is worthless during that time. I have a good example here, probably one of the best examples. I have New Mutants number 98. This is the first appearance of Deadpool. Um, this came out during that time, and this is not the best issue. This is more of a high mid grade, probably 7.5 or an 8 on a 10-point scale, and this goes for about $200 or so. Near mint one would go more towards 300 or 350, maybe 400, depending. Uh, and yeah, this is a classic case of a comic book that came out during the time and is going for a very expensive amount. But what people don't realize is it's because of the popularity of the movie that came out a few months ago, and the popularity of the character being so, I would say, funny, self-aware. It's a unique concept that is done in a comic book form. So that's what happened in the mid 90s. There was this burst. People went out of the hobby. Marvel almost went bankrupt until they got bought up by Disney. Uh, crazy things were happening, and it was largely thought to be a dying hobby. And it's the same thing that happened with baseball cards. 80s and 90s baseball cards are worth absolutely nothing, because it was the same idea that people thought if they just hold on to all these baseball cards, they would inherently gain value over time, and that's just not the case. So, luckily, the comic book community and the creators have moved past that whole ideology. Uh, we have learned from our mistakes, and now we're going to get into some more current comic books. Let's see. So, here's a general, you know, today type of comic book that you'd find. This is Uncanny Inhumans 11. This is actually a first appearance of a new hero called Mosaic, which is very interesting. And this is what you'll normally find. They go for about $4 for Marvel, and $3 for DC Comics. This is what you'll see normally on shelves. They get restocked every Wednesday with new titles. I always like to go to my comic book store every Wednesday, pick up the new titles I'm interested in, and I like to read them and then put them in a nice bag and board so that they don't get, um, severely damaged. But what's great is the comic book creators have valued more on good writing, good comic book creation, using amazing artists and stuff in order to preserve a value in these comic books, which I think is amazing. Now, lastly, there's a fairly new thing going on that has come up in the past years, and this is the idea of variant issues. So this is Gwenpool number one. Um, you won't be able to find this normally if you go into the store because this is a variant issue. Stores usually, if they order a certain amount, they get a few of these rather than a ton. And that's supposed to drive people to want to pay a little bit more to get their favorite variant. They feature different artists. They also feature sometimes different characters on the cover. Um, Gwenpool, for example, she was originally found on a cover, and now she has her own comic book. Um, just because she was so popular, people really like the idea. It's a really interesting series that's going on. I really enjoy reading it. But yeah, you have to be very, very aware when it comes to variant covers because I think some are a little bit overvalued. Uh, I feel like people are don't really understand what drives a variant cover and the value, and it's usually the same things that drive the regular comic book. With if it's a good story. Also, another driver in value is if the artist is well known. People like a lot of certain artists to do different covers, and those are what drive value. So you just have to be aware that if you want to get into variant covers and you really like it, just uh, read up about it and know exactly what you're paying for, if it's worth it, and all that kind of stuff. But that's it for today. Next time I'll go into some different topics when it comes to starting your collection and stuff like that, how to treat them, what to look for, all that good stuff. So, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead and like. If you want to talk about anything, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you guys. And please go ahead and subscribe. I would love to uh, be involved more with the community. And yeah, thank you guys.